In the history of organized crime, few names have inspired as much fear and fascination as Griselda Blanco. Long before the world knew her as the Cocaine Godmother, she was simply a young girl growing up amid poverty, violence, and political instability in Colombia. Her story is not one of sudden success or overnight power. It is the story of how a difficult childhood, combined with ambition, ruthlessness, and the rise of the international cocaine trade, transformed one woman into one of the most powerful and feared drug traffickers of the 20th century. To understand how Griselda Blanco built a deadly empire, it is necessary to begin at the very beginning, decades before Miami became the center of America's cocaine epidemic. Griselda Blanco was born on February 15, 1943, in Cartagena, historic port city on Colombia's Caribbean coast. Cartagena was famous for its colonial architecture and rich history, but beneath its beautiful appearance lay deep social inequality. Many families struggled with poverty, limited opportunities, and violence. Griselda's early years were shaped by these harsh realities. When she was still a child, her mother, Ana Lucia Restrepo, moved with her to Medellin, hoping to find better opportunities. Instead, they arrived in a rapidly growing city where poverty, crime, and overcrowded neighborhoods were becoming part of everyday life. Medellin in the 1940s and 1950s was very different from the modern city known today. Thousands of rural families had migrated there in search of work, but jobs were scarce and many ended up living in impoverished settlements on the hillsides. Basic services were limited, education was difficult to access, and children often grew up surrounded by gangs, theft, and violence. Colombia itself was entering one of the darkest periods in its modern history. Political conflict between the country's liberal and conservative parties erupted into widespread bloodshed, following the assassination of presidential candidate in 1948. The violence that followed, known as La Violencia, claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of Colombians over the next decade and created an atmosphere where brutality became a common feature of daily life. For a child growing up in these conditions, survival often depended on learning harsh lessons at an early age. One of the most widely repeated claims is that, at the age of 11, Griselda participated in the kidnapping and murder of a young boy during a failed ransom attempt. The story has appeared in numerous books and media reports, but historians have noted that it has never been conclusively verified through official records. Whether entirely true or not, the persistence of the story reflects the violent reputation that Blanco would later earn. What is more firmly established is that Griselda spent much of her youth living in extreme poverty. She reportedly left school at a young age and became involved in petty crime while still a teenager. Pickpocketing, theft, and other street crimes offered one of the few ways to earn money, in neighborhoods where legitimate opportunities were almost non-existent. The criminal underworld was not hidden from children, it existed openly around them, providing quick money and a sense of belonging that many could not find elsewhere. According to several biographical accounts, Blanco also experienced abuse during her childhood and adolescence. These experiences have often been cited as contributing factors in shaping her personality, though they cannot explain the choices she would later make. Many people endure hardship without turning to organized crime. In Blanco's case, however, the combination of poverty, violence, unstable relationships, and constant exposure to criminal activity appeared to reinforce a worldview in which power came through fear and survival depended on striking first. As she entered her teenage years, Griselda became increasingly involved with individuals connected to Medellin's growing criminal networks. During this period, Colombia's underworld was changing. Smuggling had long been a profitable business, involving cigarettes, alcohol, consumer goods, and other contraband moving through the country's ports and borders. Experienced smugglers had already developed transportation routes, bribery networks, and methods for avoiding law enforcement. These existing criminal infrastructures would later prove invaluable when cocaine emerged as one of the world's most profitable illegal commodities. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, cocaine trafficking had not yet reached the enormous scale that would define the following decades. Marijuana and other forms of contraband were more common in international smuggling operations. Cocaine remained a relatively niche drug, used primarily among wealthy consumers in certain circles. Yet the networks that would later transport cocaine across continents were already taking shape, and ambitious criminals were beginning to recognize the opportunities hidden within international smuggling. Around this time, Griselda married for the first time. Historical accounts generally identify her first husband as Carlos Trujillo, with whom she had several children. Due to poverty and her surroundings, this relationship connected her more deeply with criminal circles. Money was always scarce, and crime increasingly became not merely a means of survival but a path toward influence and wealth. By the early 1960s, Blanco had developed a reputation for intelligence, determination, and an unusual willingness to use intimidation. Those who encountered her often described her as calm under pressure and highly observant. Unlike many criminals who relied solely on physical force, Blanco appeared to possess an instinct for identifying opportunities and exploiting weaknesses in others. She understood that fear could be as valuable as money, and loyalty could often be purchased, or enforced. Colombia itself was also changing rapidly. Urban populations continued to grow, while weak institutions struggled to control expanding criminal organizations. Corruption existed at multiple levels of society, making it easier for smugglers to move goods through ports, airports, and border crossings. International demand for illegal products continued to rise, creating opportunities for increasingly sophisticated trafficking operations. These conditions did not create Griselda Blanco, but they created an environment in which someone with her ambition could thrive. During these formative years, Blanco learned lessons that would define her future career. She learned how illegal markets functioned, how criminal alliances were formed, and how quickly they could collapse through betrayal. She saw that violence often served as both a business strategy and a warning to rivals. She also discovered that the greatest fortunes in organized crime belonged not to those who carried out individual robberies, but to those who controlled entire networks of transportation, distribution, and enforcement. These insights distinguished her from many of her contemporaries. While others focused on short-term gains, Blanco increasingly thought in terms of larger operations. She recognized that true power came from controlling systems rather than individual crimes. It was an understanding that would later allow her to organize trafficking routes stretching from South America to the United States, years before many of her competitors realized the full potential of the cocaine trade. By 1964, Griselda Blanco stood at a turning point. She was no longer merely a product of Medellin's violent streets. She had gained experience, criminal connections, and an unrelenting ambition that reached far beyond Colombia's borders. The foundations of her future empire were quietly taking shape, even though the world had never heard her name. Within a few years, changing demand in the United States, expanding smuggling networks, and Blanco's own relentless drive would propel her into an emerging international drug trade unlike anything the world had seen before. The frightened child who had grown up amid poverty and political violence was about to enter a new chapter. One that would eventually reshape the cocaine trade, fuel one of the bloodiest criminal eras in American history, and earn her a title that would become infamous around the world, the Cocaine Godmother. By the mid-1960s, in the United States, heroin dominated many illegal drug markets, while cocaine remained relatively expensive and was often associated with celebrities, wealthy professionals, and elite social circles. Demand existed, but the supply chain was fragmented. Few traffickers had yet developed a reliable system capable of moving large quantities of cocaine from South America into North America. Blanco recognized this gap before many others did, and she intended to exploit it. During the late 1960s, Blanco became increasingly involved in cocaine trafficking. Historical records indicate that she spent significant time in New York City, where a growing Colombian immigrant community provided both legitimate opportunities and criminal connections. The city was one of the world's busiest commercial hubs, with constant international travel and cargo moving through its airports and seaports. For an ambitious smuggler, New York offered access to wealthy customers, extensive transportation networks, and countless ways to hide illegal shipments among millions of legal transactions. Unlike many traffickers who relied solely on brute force, Blanco approached the drug trade as a business. She studied transportation routes, identified weaknesses in customs inspections, and looked for methods that could be repeated consistently rather than relying on luck. According to investigators and former law enforcement officials, she was among the earliest traffickers to organize highly structured cocaine distribution networks, linking producers in Colombia with distributors in the United States. Her operations were built on planning, logistics, and secrecy. One of Blanco's greatest strengths was her understanding that successful smuggling depended on innovation. Law enforcement agencies were becoming more aware of international drug trafficking, forcing smugglers to develop increasingly sophisticated concealment techniques. Blanco's organization reportedly used specially designed luggage, hidden compartments in vehicles, modified household appliances, and commercial cargo shipments to transport cocaine across international borders. Some reports also describe clothing with concealed compartments created specifically for smuggling narcotics through airports. While individual methods varied over time, the underlying strategy remained the same: constantly change techniques before authorities could adapt. The ability to innovate allowed Blanco's organization to expand rapidly. Cocaine shipments grew larger, profits increased, and new distribution channels opened across the northeastern United States. Every successful shipment generated enormous revenue. A kilogram of cocaine purchased in Colombia for a relatively modest price could be sold in American cities for many times its original value. The profit margins were unlike almost anything else in organized crime. As her influence grew, Blanco surrounded herself with trusted associates, family members, and experienced smugglers who could oversee different parts of the operation. She understood that controlling every transaction personally was impossible. Instead, she built a network in which responsibilities were divided among people she believed she could trust. Transportation, storage, distribution, money collection, and enforcement became separate functions within an increasingly organized criminal enterprise. Trust, however, was always limited. The illegal drug trade was driven by enormous sums of money, and betrayal was a constant threat. Competitors attempted to steal shipments. Informants cooperated with law enforcement. Partners sometimes disappeared with profits. In this environment, Blanco developed a reputation for responding harshly to anyone she believed had betrayed her organization. Investigators consistently described her as someone willing to authorize violence to protect her business interests. By the early 1970s, cocaine consumption in the United States was rising steadily. The drug's image was very different from what it would become in later decades. It was frequently portrayed as glamorous and fashionable, appearing in nightclubs, high-end parties, and entertainment circles. At the same time, Colombia's cocaine industry was undergoing a dramatic transformation. Coca leaves were primarily cultivated in neighboring countries such as Peru and Bolivia, while Colombian traffickers increasingly specialized in processing cocaine into its refined form and organizing international distribution. Laboratories hidden in remote areas produced growing quantities of cocaine, while smuggling networks expanded toward North America and Europe. The foundations of what would later become the Medellin cartel were beginning to emerge, although the criminal landscape remained fluid and highly competitive. Griselda Blanco was operating during this formative period. Unlike some traffickers who focused mainly on production, Blanco concentrated on transportation and distribution. She understood that controlling access to American consumers could be even more profitable than controlling production itself. Her personal life during these years reflected the instability of the criminal world she inhabited. Blanco entered several relationships and marriages over the course of her life, many involving men connected to organized crime. Historical records show that her second husband was Alberto Bravo, who became an important partner in her trafficking operations. Together, they expanded cocaine smuggling activities significantly during the early 1970s. Their partnership combined operational experience with growing financial resources, allowing their organization to move increasingly large quantities of cocaine into the United States. As profits multiplied, so did suspicion. Large criminal organizations often faced internal conflicts over money, authority, and loyalty. According to multiple historical accounts, tensions eventually developed between Blanco and Bravo regarding missing profits and control of their expanding empire. One widely reported incident took place in Bogotá in the mid-1970s, where a confrontation between the two reportedly ended in a violent shootout. While the exact sequence of events remains disputed, most accounts agree that Alberto Bravo was killed during the confrontation. Blanco herself reportedly survived despite being wounded. The incident reinforced her reputation as someone willing to confront even her closest associates when power or money was at stake. Whether every detail of the story is accurate remains uncertain, but the outcome was clear. Blanco emerged with greater control over her trafficking network and continued expanding her operations without her former partner. Investigators later described her as increasingly independent, making strategic decisions herself rather than relying on male partners to lead the organization. At a time when organized crime was overwhelmingly dominated by men, this made her an extraordinary figure. She was not merely participating in the cocaine trade, she was directing major international operations. Law enforcement agencies often focused on individual arrests rather than dismantling entire trafficking networks and were never able to keep pace with the cartels. Communication between local, state, federal, and international agencies was less coordinated than it would later become. These limitations allowed sophisticated traffickers to exploit gaps in enforcement. Blanco's organization benefited from this environment, moving cocaine through multiple cities while adapting quickly whenever authorities increased pressure in one location. Money generated by the cocaine trade required equally sophisticated laundering methods. Drug profits could not simply be deposited into banks without attracting attention. Criminal organizations therefore relied on cash businesses, shell companies, international financial transfers, real estate investments, and other techniques designed to disguise the origin of illegal income. Although investigators later uncovered many aspects of these financial systems, the sheer volume of cash flowing through Blanco's organization made complete tracking nearly impossible. As the decade progressed, another city began attracting Blanco's attention. Located at the southern tip of Florida, Miami was experiencing explosive population growth, expanding international trade, and close geographic proximity to the Caribbean and Latin America. The city's ports, airports, and extensive coastline made it an ideal gateway for international smuggling. Legitimate commerce and tourism created countless opportunities to conceal illegal shipments among the constant flow of goods and travelers. Blanco recognized these advantages before many of her competitors. Moving her operations toward South Florida would shorten transportation routes from Colombia, while placing her organization closer to major American markets. Miami also offered easier access to maritime smuggling routes, and a rapidly growing network of traffickers eager to profit from the expanding cocaine trade. By the late 1970s, Griselda Blanco had transformed herself from a regional criminal into one of the most influential cocaine traffickers, operating between Colombia and the United States. She had built sophisticated smuggling networks, accumulated immense wealth, and established a reputation that inspired both fear and loyalty. As cocaine flooded into South Florida, competition for territory became increasingly ruthless. Rival organizations fought for control of distribution routes, profits reached unprecedented levels, and Miami began descending into one of the bloodiest criminal conflicts in American history. At the center of that storm stood Griselda Blanco, whose expanding empire would soon become inseparable from the violent era remembered as the Cocaine Cowboy Wars. By the end of the 1970s, Miami had become the front line of a new criminal empire. Once known primarily for its beaches, tourism, and growing skyline, the city was rapidly transforming into the main gateway for cocaine entering the United States. Its location, just a short distance from the Caribbean and South America, made it ideal for smugglers. Cargo ships, fishing boats, private aircraft, and commercial flights arrived daily, carrying millions of legitimate goods. Hidden among them were shipments of cocaine worth fortunes on the streets of America. The profits were staggering, the competition was relentless. When Griselda Blanco expanded her operations into South Florida, she entered an environment unlike anything the United States had experienced before. Cocaine consumption was rising dramatically across the country. What had once been considered a luxury drug had become increasingly popular among professionals, entertainers, athletes, and eventually a much broader section of society. Demand seemed endless. For traffickers capable of supplying the market, fortunes could be made almost overnight. But where enormous profits exist, conflict inevitably follows. Unlike traditional organized crime families that often relied on long-established hierarchies and negotiated territories, many cocaine trafficking organizations operated with fewer rules. Alliances shifted constantly. Partners became rivals overnight, trust rarely lasted. Every shipment represented millions of dollars, and every successful distributor became a target. Investigators later described Griselda Blanco as one of the most aggressive figures in this increasingly violent landscape. By this stage of her career, she was no longer simply organizing transportation routes. She was directing a large-scale criminal enterprise that included distributors, couriers, money launderers, security personnel, and armed enforcers. As her business expanded, so did the number of enemies she created. Blanco routinely used violence to eliminate competitors, intimidate informants, recover stolen shipments, and enforce discipline within her organization. While Blanco earned a reputation as one of the most feared traffickers of her era, many murders attributed to her were never fully resolved, in court due to the lack of surviving witnesses, unreliable testimony, or the disappearance of evidence. The period that became known as the Cocaine Cowboy era transformed the city almost overnight. Assassinations occurred in shopping centers, restaurants, apartment buildings, highways, and parking lots. Public shootings that once would have shocked the nation became disturbingly common. Automatic weapons appeared with increasing frequency. Innocent bystanders were sometimes caught in crossfire as rival traffickers settled disputes in broad daylight.
This map
Police
confirms the
departments
location
found
mentioned in
themselves
the letter.
overwhelmed.
I'll add it to the report now.
Many officers had never encountered criminal organizations operating with such extraordinary financial resources. Traffickers could purchase expensive vehicles, multiple safe houses, sophisticated communications equipment, and high-powered firearms. Corruption also became a growing concern, as enormous sums of money tempted individuals working in law enforcement, customs, and other public institutions. The scale of the cocaine trade also placed unprecedented pressure on federal agencies. The Drug Enforcement Administration, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the United States Customs Service, and local police departments increasingly realized that they were confronting organizations operating across international borders rather than isolated criminal gangs. Stories about her spread throughout both criminal circles and the media. Newspapers portrayed her as a ruthless queen-pin, who ruled through fear. Some reports claimed she ordered killings over relatively minor disputes. Others described her as calculating rather than impulsive, preferring violence only when it served a strategic purpose. Former investigators later recalled that witnesses were often terrified to cooperate in cases connected to Blanco. Potential informants feared retaliation not only against themselves but also against their families. Blanco also demonstrated an unusual ability to adapt, whenever authorities increased surveillance on one transportation route, new routes quickly appeared. If one distribution network was compromised, another replaced it. Couriers changed methods, smuggling techniques evolved continuously. Her organization displayed a level of operational flexibility that frustrated investigators attempting to dismantle the network. Millions of dollars in cash flowed through the organization every month. The money had to be hidden, transported, invested, or laundered before it could be used openly. Luxury homes, expensive automobiles, jewelry, and overseas investments became common ways of converting illegal profits into tangible assets. Yet despite extraordinary wealth, security remained fragile. Every successful trafficker lived under constant threat, from rivals seeking territory, employees tempted by betrayal, and law enforcement agencies closing in. By the early 1980s, the violence in Miami had reached such alarming levels that it attracted national attention. As violence escalated, federal authorities intensified their efforts. Special task forces were established. Intelligence sharing between agencies improved. Surveillance operations became more sophisticated. Investigators increasingly focused not only on street-level dealers, but also on the financial structures supporting major trafficking organizations. The goal shifted from making individual arrests to dismantling entire criminal enterprises. Griselda Blanco soon became one of their highest priorities. Investigators spent years gathering evidence from intercepted communications, financial records, confidential informants, surveillance operations, and cooperating witnesses. Building a prosecutable case, however, proved extraordinarily difficult. Witnesses frequently disappeared, changed their stories, or refused to testify. Others were killed before reaching court. Prosecutors faced an organization that operated across multiple jurisdictions and international borders. Meanwhile, Blanco herself remained elusive. Aware that authorities were closing in, she reportedly changed residences frequently, relied on trusted intermediaries, and limited unnecessary public appearances. Maintaining secrecy became increasingly important as law enforcement pressure mounted. Despite these precautions, the balance of power was beginning to shift. The very qualities that had fueled Blanco's rise. Rapid expansion, enormous profits, and widespread influence, also made her organization more visible. Every additional shipment created new opportunities for investigation. Every new associate increased the possibility of betrayal. Every act of violence attracted greater attention from authorities determined to stop the bloodshed. By the mid-1980s, the era of operating with relative freedom was coming to an end. Federal investigators had spent years assembling evidence against some of the largest cocaine traffickers in the world. International cooperation between the United States and Colombia was expanding. Financial investigations were becoming more effective. Surveillance technology continued improving. The environment that had allowed Blanco's empire to flourish was changing rapidly. For the woman who had spent years staying one step ahead of rivals and investigators alike, the next challenge would not come from another trafficker. It would come from the combined resources of the American justice system. After years of evading capture, Griselda Blanco's long run was nearing its end. Her arrest would mark the beginning of another chapter. One defined not by expanding empires, but by courtrooms, prison walls, and the gradual collapse of the criminal network she had spent decades building. After years of surveillance and intelligence gathering, authorities finally located Blanco in Southern California. On February 17, 1985, agents from the Drug Enforcement Administration arrested her at her home in Irvine, California, without a violent confrontation. Her arrest made headlines across the United States. Newspapers described her as the cocaine godmother and one of the most powerful women in organized crime. For many Americans, it was the first time they had heard her name. Behind the sensational headlines, however, prosecutors faced a far more complicated challenge. Arresting Blanco was only the beginning. Convicting her on major criminal charges would require evidence strong enough to survive lengthy court proceedings. Federal prosecutors initially charged Blanco with drug conspiracy offenses related to importing and distributing cocaine. These charges were supported by extensive investigations into her trafficking operations, financial records, and testimony from cooperating witnesses. Even while serving time in federal prison, Blanco remained under investigation for numerous violent crimes. Authorities in Florida believed she had ordered multiple murders during the height of the Miami drug wars. Building homicide cases, however, proved considerably more difficult than prosecuting drug trafficking offenses. Many of the individuals who could testify against her had either disappeared, been killed, or refused to cooperate out of fear. Eventually, prosecutors in Miami prepared murder charges against Blanco based largely on testimony from former associates willing to become state witnesses. One of the most important witnesses was Jorge "Rivi" Ayala, a former hitman, who admitted participating in numerous killings connected to the cocaine trade. Ayala became a central figure in the prosecution's attempt to connect Blanco directly to several murders. The case appeared strong, but it soon encountered an extraordinary and highly publicized setback. During preparations for trial, it emerged that Ayala had engaged in inappropriate telephone conversations of a sexual nature with female employees working in the office of the Miami-Dade state attorney. This misconduct, it severely damaged the credibility of the prosecution. Defense attorneys argued that the integrity of the investigation had been compromised. The controversy weakened what prosecutors considered their most important witness and complicated efforts to move forward with the murder cases. As legal challenges mounted, several homicide charges became increasingly difficult to prosecute. Witnesses became unavailable, evidence aged, and the likelihood of obtaining reliable testimony diminished over time. Ultimately, prosecutors reached an agreement that resolved the remaining state cases without proceeding through lengthy murder trials. As a result, Blanco did not receive convictions for the numerous killings that investigators had long suspected she had ordered. While imprisoned, Blanco spent nearly 2 decades behind bars. During those years, the global cocaine trade continued evolving. New trafficking organizations emerged. Mexican criminal organizations gradually assumed a greater role in transporting cocaine into the United States, fundamentally reshaping international drug trafficking. In 2004, after completing her federal sentence and resolving the remaining legal matters in Florida, Griselda Blanco was released from prison. She was deported from the United States to Colombia, returning to the country where her life had begun more than 60 years earlier. Unlike many infamous criminals who attempt to rebuild their organizations after release, Blanco appeared to live a relatively quiet life upon her return to Medellin. Public sightings were rare. She largely stayed away from media attention and no longer occupied the powerful position she had once held within international drug trafficking. The cocaine trade had moved on without her. For nearly 8 years, she remained out of the international spotlight. Then, on September 3, 2012, her story came to a sudden and dramatic end. That afternoon, Griselda Blanco visited a neighborhood butcher shop in Medellin. As she left the store and approached her vehicle, a man riding as a passenger on a motorcycle pulled alongside and opened fire. Blanco was struck by multiple gunshots and died at the scene at the age of 69. With her death, one of the most infamous figures in the history of international drug trafficking was gone. With every empire built on violence, carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. Rivals emerge. Allies become enemies. Investigators close in. Time erodes even the most powerful criminal organizations.